Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Digital Adoption Show. Today, we are here with a panel of experts sharing their experiences and insights. Our first guest for today is Ashwin Mehta. He's an AI strategist, thought leader, and management consultant, and a learning technology leader. He has been working for about 14 years at a senior level across transport, consulting, medical, and pharmaceutical sectors. And he also holds an MBA and a PhD in learning technology adoption, and his experience includes data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. So, a huge welcome to you, Ashwin. My first question to you is, how can enterprises leverage digital adoption platforms within their learning and development technology stack to seamlessly manage and enhance workforce skills, ensuring better alignment with organizational goals?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I'll talk about the stack in a second, but it's also important to just position all of this in learning versus learning and development. So learning as a human imperative. So every person, every child that sees fire for the first time somehow learns. It's a natural part of the human condition. We learn from our environment, we learn from each other. That's separate to the concept of enterprise learning and development. So enterprise learning and development tends to be how do organizations manage either skills or knowledge throughout the entirety of their workforce? How do they then report on those things? And how do they try to make slightly different strategies for competitive advantage? That's a very different thing from human learning. So let's establish that at the outset. Now, the stack, the concept of a stack, is talking about technology architecture that helps an enterprise do the second thing that I said, to manage the skills and knowledge and information across their human capital, across their workforce. And that architecture tends to be slightly different depending on the size of the organization. But typically we're looking at some kind of skills that might come from an HR system. So for example, Oracle, SAP, Workday, these kinds of tools, or it might come from something a little bit more specialist, talent marketplace kind of technology. So Eightfold, Glows, Fuel First, all of these kinds of companies. But in that
Mm-hmm.
space, you have, can we measure effectively the talent marketplace, the skills marketplace? So supply and demand. What do we want? How do we get it from our workforce? And usually if we can't get it, we turn to learning. So we say we want to develop skills in our internal workforce, or we turn to recruitment.
Amazing. That was insightful. Can you throw some light on how organizations can effectively integrate digital adoption tools and AI technologies into their learning development stacks to enhance learning in the flow of work while minimizing complexity and maximizing value?
Regards to bringing these skills in from externally, we could also turn to procurement strategy. So we're going to use a particular vendor or particular supplier that has these skills that we don't have. So you've got your skills architecture there. Typically, then your learning stack tends to be an experience layer, learning experience layer, a learning management system, and some kind of database with some kind of data repository. The market in this space, in the learning experience and the learning management system area, management is effectively push, experience is effectively pull. So we need our workforce to do certain things. We call that training. This is mandatory. It's a risk mitigation measure for the business. Let's not pretend that it's learning. Most people don't learn anything from that. But the organization
Mhm.
says we have a tick box and we have satisfied some kind of requirement that we needed to fulfill. So that's your management system. And you can push things to different people, different roles, and then you can validate the data effectively, click the button. The experience layer is slightly different. So that's people pulling from content repositories, content libraries. You might get LinkedIn Learning Go One style of content libraries, which link into platforms like Degree, Edcast, Learning Pool, these kinds of things. And you get this ability to effectively the Netflix model. So this is where people who watch this content also watch this other content based on your prior history. Maybe you're interested in X, Y, and sometimes you get some skill architecture in there. But the Netflix problem also persists, which is you spend more time looking at things than you do watching things. So you get those couple of angles, but your typical stack tends to be some kind of content library, some kind of experience layer that allows you to access content libraries, and some kind of push mechanism, things like
Mhm.
training. All of that needs to be underpinned by data. So we talk about a typical L&D paradigm is learners access content on an infrastructure and that produces data. The interaction itself produces data. So you need some database structure to capture that content. I've just mentioned content. So you need usually some kind of technology to build digital learning content, whatever that looks like. You have the articulator, Lucidats kind of captivates it as well, where you can build SCORM packages and you can put those onto your push system and then make people do that. That's basically your typical stack. Now, in a large enterprise, depending on what large means, you usually have the productivity systems. So Microsoft systems, for example, Teams and Office and all of these things as well. So we shouldn't ignore those because they're also a vital part of learning in the flow of work. So learning in the flow of work means I'm using Office systems and somehow there should be some learning right there, some kind of information, something that I can do. And this is where potentially AI tools or potentially digital adoption tools come in really handy because it's closer to the flow of work than I'm trying to learn something. So I'm going to go to a completely different platform with a completely different URL and potentially a different password. And I'm going to try and find some kind of content I can leverage in the thing that I'm doing over here on this screen. So as close as we can be to learning in the flow of work is ideal. And of course, the question arises then if enterprises are putting in all of this architecture and I want to learn how to, what's the formula for something in Excel? Probably I'm going to go to YouTube. Am I really going to go to this shiny, expensive architecture that my company has put in? So there's a point about value in there somewhere. Try and implement something that has value. And a lot of companies I see have sprawling technology landscapes. So I've got 25 LMSs and I've got 65 different content libraries, for all of which have got something ever so slightly different. And I've purchased Coursera and I've purchased this other thing, and all of these companies are examples, of course. But typically it's complex the bigger the business gets. But at its core, it's usually some kind of push, some kind of pull, and let's not forget some kind of share, so some kind of social learning, chat functionality, Slack, Teams. You can do these forums and some of the LSPs as well. When you have a complex system, of course, you need to think about APIs. So how does data flow through all of the systems? And we also have now the scary word of AI applications. So AI applications, some of these systems, of course, have AI functionality in them. So matching algorithms and skills or experience platforms, you might have AI assistants, you might have AI generated content. So all of these things are being woven into the fabric of a typical stack. But you also have standalone applications as well. These are the Synthesia, Colossian, Owl one for avatars. You have the Midjourney, DALL-E of this world of image generation. They have all the stable diffusion and all of these things for creating a few other things, runway, etc., etc. So all of these kind of content tools, they stand aside from the typical stack, but the outputs would need to go into the typical stack if they're going to be measured in some way as well.
Let's welcome our second guest for today, Joe Hill Wilson. Joe is the Chief Commercial Officer, Lead Solutions Architect, and one of the founding members of LearnAng. With 18 years of experience helping global organizations to scale, Joe specializes in people, operations, and organizational development. As a former head of L&D for a global service business, Joe has extensive experience in building L&D departments from ground up. And he did that for a mid-sized firm, starting from a team of 70 people to an international organization with over 900 employees. Joe's expertise lies in linking employee and customer experiences, and he sees synergies across organizational identity and culture. Welcome, Joe. My first question to you is, how can digital adoption tools and strategies help simplify complex learning and development systems, ensuring that content and AI driven recommendations align with individual learner needs without overwhelming them?
Thank you so much. What an introduction. Always interesting hearing your kind of career being played back to you. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. I think there definitely are differences. I think there's also lots of synergies as well. I think from a customer perspective, the things they care about are, is it easy to use? Is it enjoyable? Is it delivering value for our different stakeholders, our end users, our senior stakeholders? How much support do we get? How reliable is it? And I think from a vendor perspective, we care about engagement and utilization. I think we care about obviously kind of sales and revenue generation, but also massively in terms of kind of user NPS, in terms of feedback, in terms of making sure that we're driving advocacy and that we're able to kind of show how solutions that we create are differentiated in how they provide value for customers as well. So I think there's a lot of synergy and alignment around what does that value look like and how can you demonstrate that back to the organization as well. So I think the things that work really well in vendor and customer relationship center around being really aligned around expectations. What roles are you both playing? Making sure that you are actually giving time to each other, because vendors really need to understand organizations, what's going on inside the organization, what problems are they having a really kind of continuous updated sense of, so that they can actually provide the best consultative support and develop their product to keep on meeting the needs of those customers as well. And I think there needs to be openness and transparency. It's really, we see feedback, for instance, as being a real gift. So we want to hear all of the, the maybe more negative or kind of constructive elements as well. I know our chief product officer always says in product that there's a kind of a saying, which is, I'm happy for you to tell me that my baby's ugly, which is you kind of want to know the things that aren't working quite so well so that you can actually act on those as well. So I think having that open, transparent relationship can really, really help. And then also being very specific around what you're working on, having measurable outcomes that both parties understand and can be working toward. I think the more specific the goals and the use cases, the more value that people get from adopting the platforms. I mean, customer feedback should be at the absolute center of your product methodology and all of your processes. So I think it's been one of the things that Learner we've been really good at over the years. So I think when you're looking at creating a business in the first place, you need to understand, well, who first are you designing product for? So like, what does that ideal customer profile look like? How well do you know them? Do you really get under the skin of like what's going on in their world? What problems are they facing? How can you create value for them? Then I think it's about engaging with those people. It's about trying to see if you can do interviews and workshops where you actually speak to them about in a lot of detail the things that are going on in their work lives, and then looking at creating solutions. I think staying agile in a product development perspective is super important, not being waterfall, not having too much of a kind of fixed mindset around what your product needs to be, and actually being able to iterate based on feedback that you get from your customers. And over time, I think that changes a little bit. I think you get more clear as you have more experience about what your product needs to look like and where it delivers value. But I think in the early stages, lots of MVPing, lots of minimal viable products, testing, iterating, I think is hugely important. And then I think it's really important that all the way through production, get your customers involved in alpha testing, beta testing, user acceptance testing. So at each stage, they're being able to give you that really kind of critical feedback so that you're developing and refining things actually have a real value for them. And then I think the last thing is, have you got very good metrics, kind of customer metrics, which will allow you to understand, are you achieving the things that you set out to achieve? And are you going back continually to measure against those kind of North Star metrics? And if you're not, just keep on going. Don't try and focus on other parts of the product. Keep on going until you're delivering that core value. Because once you've got the core value that people are driving the platform, then you can start to work on other aspects. So I think too often people just try and build too much rather than focusing on the things that drive the most value to people. I think you've got to be open to it. I think, as I said, it's really, it's a gift. I think as long as I think with all feedback, I worked for a long time as well in the kind of customer experience space. When you're receiving feedback, it's not personal to you. It's someone's perception. And you have to take that in the context feedback that you get from lots of people. So some people, you can't keep everyone happy. Some people are going to be negative. Some people aren't quite appreciate your platform the way that others do. So understanding where the majority of the people that you want to focus on and how they feel is important. But with the negative feedback, I think it's about really understanding where that comes from and understanding what problem ultimately people are trying to solve. Because there's lots of creative ways that you can solve a problem. It doesn't have to be, customers will often give you ideas about how to improve your product in a very specific way. And we often say, no, let's understand what you're trying to achieve. And then together we can find solutions. And sometimes they can be quite flexible. I think, again, in Learning, we've done a very good job to have tools that can be flexed in lots of different use cases. And we've tried to do that so that they can be personalized to each individual customer. So yeah, try not to be too specific, understand what the root cause is of what they're trying to do, and then develop a product that meets that need, I think.
Right. And how can digital adoption platforms help bridge the gap between vendor offerings and customer expectations, ensuring ease of use, stakeholder satisfaction, and measurable value while incorporating customer feedback into product development?
I think in the L&D space, I think there's a lot of people that haven't worked in L&D. So I think they're building technology that they think the people want, or solutions that they think they want. I think sometimes they're too far removed from the actual customers and what's going on in their lives. I think it's one of a lot of us have got backgrounds in the L&D space, learn and I think that helps us to stay focused on solving problems that we used to have. And I think the more that you can be involved in roundtables, you can actually go and meet customers. You can be involved in community groups where L&D practitioners are talking about their problems. I think the closer you get to what really drives value for them. So as an example, skills in our space in AI are quite, a lot of people talk about the value of having them in the solutions, but actually a lot of businesses aren't mature enough yet to apply a kind of skill-based approach. Or in AI, even though lots of people are talking about it, actually lots of businesses don't feel that they're yet at a place which, well, they'll benefit most from some of the applications of AI, or their businesses don't even allow them to be able to use AI from a kind of security and a legal perspective as well. So I think staying very focused and trying to sometimes block out all of the shiny things that can apply in our space to focus on the things that drive most engagement are really important. But some of the things I think in our space we see come up a lot, gamification being used as a way to talk about engagement. I think it can be a part of your strategy, but ultimately it can be quite thin and motivators for people. People do like reward, but it's a bit like dopamine hits on your phone. It only lasts for so long. You need to kind of tap into what intrinsically motivates people about their careers and why the learning is actually going to help to impact their lives and help them to develop. So I think that's one big thing. I think I've already said it, but AI being the answer to everything. I actually think, for instance, with AI recommendations, we know that AI has kind of hallucinations and it's only good as the data in which it's pulling those recommendations from. So in software, there's, this concept of mixed initiatives, which is the human has to be involved in also saying, well, where am I at now? And what do I want to learn going forward? It's not just about understanding what I've learned in the past to recommend content to me. So I think there needs to be flexibility that the human, the individual, can also adapt the way that those algorithms work or can influence the way that those algorithms work. And then there are other things like in our space, I think there's always a big push on creating more content, having more content partners. But we don't need more content. Content is not the problem. It's about being able to understand the unique development needs of each person and then surfacing the right kind of offering to them, not having too much because it just essentially it overwhelms people and it creates more noise. And then I think the last thing I'd say is products that do really well are often very good because they are simple, easy to use, and they focus on the core problems or the core solutions that they need. More functionality doesn't equal kind of more sophistication. And I think it can create a lot of complexity sometimes with products as well. It's fine to have a broad product, but you need to then be able to tailor that to be able to turn things off and be able to make sure that you're really just delivering the value that the customer needs. Otherwise, systems can overwhelm a lot of people, I think.
Another very special guest joining us today is Dr. Thomas Bloomer, who was the Director of Knowledge Management at CAD. So, without any further delay, let's first get to know our guest. With over 20 years in the field, he has a strong background in developing global knowledge management and learning strategies. Thomas also worked for Stream Fortune 500 companies, where he excelled in implementing KM solutions and optimizing cost accounting. Welcome, Thomas. So, my first question to you is, how did the implementation of digital adoption platforms help improve onboarding efficiency, reduce support costs, and drive productivity gains at scale for an ERP company?
Thank you for the nice introduction. Really great to be here. Well, one of the challenges as an ERP company is to help people onboard customers and employees very quickly. And we have done that in traditional ways with traditional training, all the way back, classroom training. Then we could convert that into e-learning. And that was great. We saw a huge adoption jump there. But there was still something missing. And we always felt it's like people get the training in the wrong time, not when they really need it. They had to schedule it. And once digital adoption platforms became available, we was like, that's what we need. We can train as people need it inside the application. So we actually built a lot of training right in the application. And if that was not appropriate because some use cases may be too complex. We could link them directly to the learning management system, right to the right place, so they don't have to go and start looking like what traditional links normally do. And if something changed, we can easily change it because we still have the control. It's not a hard link like what you have done in traditional systems. So by doing so, we could really move the needle and we increased about onboarding time or decreased the time by 26%, like huge gains, making that happen. Also from call deflection for support center, the first year, I think we closed about 26,000 support calls. I mean, it's always hard to really, like, was that really an avoided call or maybe, and how many did you avoid, which you don't really measure. But so that's a safe number. We felt very comfortable. But yeah, it was a huge game changer for us.
And when you talk about productivity gains at scale, number of employees in the organization, this is tremendous quantitative, value that you're talking about.
Great answer. Following that, I have to ask you about how can digital adoption platforms help organizations improve user experience, reduce errors, and track user behavior. Additionally, how can ROI, cost of inaction, and storytelling play a role in justifying the implementation of dApps? And with that, we wrap today's conversation. Digital adoption is a transformative force in modern learning technology stacks. By simplifying access, embedding learning into workflows, and offering contextual support, it ensures that learning solutions are not just implemented but truly utilized. Thank you to our guests who brought in those amazing insights, and thank you to our listeners who have joined us on this wonderful episode. We encourage you to explore similar insightful episodes on the Digital Adoption Show, available across all your platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and more. I'm your host, Ankit Kumar Singh, signing off with new episodes coming in every week. Stay tuned for more interesting and insightful ones to come.
Absolutely. So digital adoption platform, often abbreviated as DApp, is a software overlay on top of your existing application. That can be a web application, a desktop application, or even a mobile application. Now you wonder, like, why would I need an overlay on my software I just purchased? You're like, well, just think about how many times you got frustrated because it didn't work the way you expect it to work, or how much time you wasted finding a feature exists, but you don't use it all the time. And that even happens when I use Instagram. So like, where is my saved image? And then you have to click 5 items till you see it. Now with Tab, you can just automate that process. If that's something which you do all the time or your organization needs to do all the time, you can now create your own button on any screens which makes sense to go to these other screens you always have a hard time finding or is time consuming. So you can actually modify your application without actually going to the code level to make your unique user experience much better. And to your second part, why is it important right now? I mean, there's so much change coming. There's so much AI at the brink to be introduced. Now you have a tool to control AI. You can control other applications. And more importantly, you can actually see what's happening in your organization. Many times people don't even know how their own application is used, where it works well, where people struggle, where people have a lot of errors. Now you have all this visibility and you can take actionable steps to help the situation with that. So I think it's just a tremendous tool.
Right. Very interesting. So it sounds like you can track user behavior and how they're using the system or how they should be using it, and also influence that behavior by setting up certain nudges or notifications, etc. that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, just think about, traditional UX sessions, like where you have a few people or you interview them. And many times they kind of tell you what you want to hear, or they try to figure out what this application should do because they are embarrassed to really tell you how they abuse your system, for other purpose. And now with that, you just see where they go and what they do. And sometimes like, why are they going there? And the insights we gain is quite amazing. And so you can actually turn any user session into a potential UX session and learn from it. So I think it's super powerful. The base is always a return on investment calculation. I don't think you can go to any board without having done the numbers, thinking about call deflection, shortening your process time, lowering error rates, faster onboarding, and how much that will contribute to your organization. I think that's just the foundation. But then another thing which some people don't think about is the cost of inaction. What is the cost of inaction if you don't do it? And think about what will it cost you from a reputation or even a financial impact if someone uses in a unsanctioned AI solution. If there's data leak, what kind of cost does that generate for your company? And so you should also put a value to that. So that's the second level. But then the third level, which I think people often fall short, which I think is super important, is storytelling. Like what's a compelling story why you need DApp? And I can share a classic example from the 90s from Steve
Please,
Bannon. He was lead of the World Bank. And back in the days, they didn't have an internet presence. And rather than putting numbers together, why they should and how much it will cost to host a site and all that, he actually provided a very compelling story of a little town somewhere in Africa. And they had this huge need help, but they couldn't find the World Bank because they were not on the internet. How in the world could you find the World Bank if you don't even have an internet presence? And so what people should remember is like people forget numbers, but they remember stories. And if you have a really compelling story, why DApp can really make a quantum leap in your organization, in addition to the ROI and the cost of inaction, I think then you have a really good package. So I would say put those three together, bundle them and present them, and you have a winning combination.
And with that, we wrap today's conversation. Digital adoption is a transformative force in modern learning technology stacks. By simplifying access, embedding learning into workflows, and offering contextual support, it ensures that learning solutions are not just implemented but truly utilized. Thank you to our guests who brought in those amazing insights, and thank you to our listeners who have joined us on this wonderful episode. We encourage you to explore similar insightful episodes on the Digital Adoption Show, available across all your platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and more. I'm your host, Ankit Kumar Singh, signing off with new episodes coming in every week. Stay tuned for more interesting and insightful ones to come.